Welcome back. David Hertel in for Elias. So what are the dangers of getting an illegal abortion or trying to do it yourself at home, which is scary at the very least? With Roe versus Wade overturned, what makes this a risky reality for some women in the United States? To give us more insight, I'm joined by Dr. Christopher Labos. You know him well. He's a cardiologist with a degree in epidemiology who can be heard at 8:10 on Sunday mornings on CJAD 800, on weekends with Ken. Good morning, Dr. Labos.
Good morning. Good morning.
So, I mean, as a medical practitioner, what was your reaction? I'd love to get your take on when you learned about this decision in the U.S. What came through your mind?
Well, I was actually quite surprised. I actually didn't think it was going to happen, although I guess I don't follow U.S. politics as closely as I should. It is rather surprising, especially when you look at some of the more austere state laws that were passed in the wake of this, sort of, almost suggesting that no abortion would be available. Because even if you go back to a pre-Roe versus Wade era, even in that setting, when abortions were not available widely, there were still obvious circumstances where they would be necessary, like cases of ectopic pregnancy and the like. And the suggestion that there would be no abortions under any circumstance is frankly ludicrous, because there's many situations where they are life-saving procedures, quite frankly. And so, I don't suspect that we're going to see anything similar happening here in Canada, but it is a little bit concerning that you can see something like this, because the reality is, when abortions were illegal, there were a lot of, for lack of a better term, black market abortions being done by people who were not skilled, who were not doing this in sanitary in a sanitary fashion, and were causing a lot of problems. A lot of women got sick from illegal abortions, and it's a situation where the law makes things worse, because you're just driving something underground and just creating an unsafe environment where a lot of unsafe procedures were being done. And if you want sort of an example of that, go back and watch the movie Dirty Dancing, which you would say is like sort of a strange, but go back and watch the movie Dirty Dancing. Like, people can die from an unsafe abortion, and that is the unfortunate reality of what happened in many situations. Actually, if you want another fictional example, Michael Crichton, who's most people know, his first book that he ever wrote, he wrote under a pseudonym, and it was called A Case of Need or something like that, and it's a mystery, and it centers on this situation, on the harms of illegal abortion. So if you're ever curious to read something written by Michael Crichton but not under his name, that will give you a good sense of what the world was sort of like back then, where there was this very real danger of women going and getting an abortion in some sort of back alley clinic and then suffering the medical complications of it, and sometimes even dying.
And you were saying earlier that, when the health of the mother is involved, this is like, there are a lot of these examples where this practice will be necessary. This will be necessary to save the life of the mother. Maybe you could give us some examples.
Well, the obvious one is an ectopic pregnancy, where even back in the day, there was no controversy regarding that. An ectopic pregnancy cannot be carried to term. It is not a viable pregnancy, and so performing abortions in that situation, I don't believe has any ethical or moral quandaries for anyone. So to see those types of bans being put in place is, it's hard to even understand what the logic behind that even is. So there are obvious situations, and I understand that this is an issue that people have a lot of complex moral and ethical feelings about, but there is a difference between how you feel regarding an issue morally and how you would respond to that situation as an individual versus passing a law banning its effect. And if you want to parallel, think back to Prohibition. You can have your own personal thoughts about whether alcohol is a good thing or a bad thing. But when you try to make alcohol illegal, you create a series of downstream consequences that just makes the situation worse. And, with Prohibition, it ended up essentially funding organized crime. Organized crime became a lot more prominent because that was what happened in terms of that sprung up to, in fact, defy the law. And the issue with with abortions that if you try to make them illegal, all you do is you create these illegal clinics that end up performing unsafe abortions and putting women at undue medical risk.
Another consequence, Dr. Labos, has been discussed since Friday is that this will mean that probably a lot of American women will come to Canada to get to get abortions. So, isn't the last thing we need right now is more pressure on our system?
I mean, very possibly. Now we'll have to see if that actually happens or not. I mean, most of the states doing this do tend to be southern states. So if this was happening in northern states, cross-border states where people are used to coming to Canada for various activities, that may end up being a more that might have ended up being a more significant issue. As it stands now, I suspect what's going to happen is people are going to be doing a lot more interstate travel within the United States, going to states where abortions are still legal, and probably utilizing telehealth a lot more without, not necessarily having to physically travel, but accessing a provider in another state. And so the issue there is really going to be, can the billing codes and the bureaucracy adapt to accommodate this? Because that's actually probably going to be easier for people when they're traveling within the United States. The minute you start traveling international borders, things do start to become a little bit more complicated. And given the geographic distance between some of these states and Canada, we'll have to end up seeing how much of an issue that actually becomes. But within the U.S., travel, I think, is probably going to become a lot more of an issue. And it's going to be interesting to see how telehealth responds to that, because that is a way to get around a lot of these state bans, which is you just consult with a doctor in another place. And especially since, abortions, especially early on, can be done medically without a surgical intervention, you don't necessarily have to go and physically see your doctor. You could get a lot of the preparatory testing done locally, get the medication, and have it done at home. So there are options available. It's just a question of, can we do what's necessary to implement the technology to make it happen?
Yeah, well, it's true that right now you're looking at more of the red states, but right now, for example, there's a 1931 law on the books in Michigan, which outlaws abortion, that is now back in force because of the Supreme Court decision. And so, and the Dakotas. And so there's a lot of questions about some Americans needing to come to Canada, but I totally understand your point. So in terms of, from a medical perspective, I mean, what kind of message, does this send to women, women's health professionals? I mean, this has a lot of ramifications, right?
It does, and I think that's why you've seen multiple professional societies across the U.S. and Canada sort of come out against this sort of thing, because of the very real concern that people are going to be denied the medical care that they need. And again, regardless of the personal feelings that you might have regarding abortion and, the ethical concerns that you might have as an individual, you have to take a step back and look at the situation more globally and realize that a lot of harm can come from this, because we've been here before. We've seen what the situation was like when abortions were illegal. A lot of very, very unsafe and a lot of very nefarious things were being done and caused people actual harm. And so there's something this is something that we definitely have to keep in mind.
Appreciate your perspective as always, Dr. Labos. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. You take care.
You too. Dr. Christopher Labos, cardiologist with a degree in epidemiology, who can be heard at 8:10 on Sunday mornings on CJAD, 800 on weekends with Ken.